Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Barron.
And I'm Brendan Schneider.
Yeah, and welcome to the Leadership Backstory. So, Brendan, it's fun when we can bring people that we've known for a long time onto the pod. And I think today that checks that box, right? We've got a great story to tell. And Jordan Raymer, who is the founder of EV Connect, is joining us. He was also my college roommate, back in the way back in the day when I had hair and not a gray beard and all those sorts of things. So
I can attest
Jordan,
to that.
welcome.
I can attest that he did have hair.
Yeah, I was gonna say something like you got to tell Brendan that I used to have hair. I used to have I used to actually have stuff on top of my head. So all good things. Jordan, thanks for doing this today. I appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and, Jordan, I think back to college, and we both went to Skidmore College, and it was really clear to me that you had a business mindset all the way back. I mean, I know you're a business major, and I just remember some conversations around the stuff that interests you. You jumped out of Skidmore and then went into consulting, right? That was your first step after Skidmore?
Yeah. Financial consulting, accounting. Yeah, some pretty unsexy stuff. But yes, that was
What did you take from that? How because you obviously landed in a very different place. So I'm curious, how did that larger corporate environment prepare you for some of the stuff that came later?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I've actually given this advice a lot when talking to younger folks who are looking for career guidance. I think there's a lot of benefits to even if you feel like you're entrepreneurial and you want to take that path in life to just understand how larger organizations operate. In whatever capacity, whether it means being a barista at Starbucks or having a more formal corporate office job. I think there's just those organizations got to where they are because they've put a lot of processes and procedures and things in place that really is where you're trying to get to in the entrepreneurial journey. And so I would say I learned both within the context of my first job for the company that I work for, which is quite large, but also the clients. Right? We had clients from a myriad of different places and locations. And I remember, I was 22 years old. I was doing consulting for what became, the Accenture and Anderson companies. And I was in the Los Angeles office, and I'd wake up every day and I didn't know where I was going to be going. And every day was a little bit different. I'd end up with a different client in a different place. And I learned a lot about Los Angeles. I learned a lot about a lot of different industries, and it helped me to kind of figure out what I liked and what I didn't about certain types of companies and industries. One of the things I realized was I liked tangible things versus a little more esoteric. But also, I also learned that I really was not a financial guy. I mean, I understood it, but and I would probably need more time, and I need the psychologist couch to lie on to explain how I ended up doing that for my first job. I think a lot of it goes back to my childhood with, my father was an entrepreneur, and there were so many ups and downs that you might expect having a parent that had that. And he was very transparent about money and our financial situation. And, sometimes it was like the sky was the limit, and sometimes it was, eating ramen. And so I think reflecting on all of it, I ended up in that, fairly conservative role and which turned out to be phenomenally useful because I was looking for more stability. But ultimately was a great launching point, both from the things that I learned, both technically and otherwise, but also just about myself, right? And what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do.
So I was going to ask you, and then you explain, but where did you go into that job thinking you were going to be an entrepreneur, or did I just hear that? No. I was I wanted to take the safer route. I didn't want to live that life at that age anyway.
That's interesting. I think I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I justified that role by saying, which I think is very true. And people gave me this advice, which is that it's a great foundation for business, for whatever that means. Right? So it was sort of like, okay, well, I don't know what I want to do. I kind of knew, as you noted, Pete, right? I was interested in business. I was a business major. And it was like, I guess I had envisioned myself, right, in the future, whatever that meant, being entrepreneurial, but I had no idea how to get there, and I had no idea what to do after I graduated, right? And so this was a great way to get kind of a 101 course in a first real job and an opportunity to learn and try to figure it out.
So you left there and then went to a company called Environment. Are they still in business? Is that still an organization?
Yeah, no, they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I left. I actually left my, finance, accounting, consulting gig, and I went to business school for 2 years. And really, like many folks, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I was using business school as a way to kind of try to figure that out. And I do think it's hard when you're in a job. It's so easy to get caught up in the industry that you're in and the role that you have and trying to get to the next step. And I had been, right? I remember, getting the corporate recruiter calls when I was in the consulting gig and sort of like trying to figure out what the next step was. And I saw the people leaving and going on to their next financial gig or whatever. And I think it's just your career kind of snowballs in that direction based on just this first gig that you pick, And so business school was a great opportunity, and I think a great fortuitous situation for me where I had 2 years of no real responsibility, right? I wasn't married. I didn't have any kids. I had a kind of a vision for what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to get there. And so it was my opportunity to really, think through that. And what I found, and this is, I think, a pivotal period for me, was that I had this real deep-rooted interest in the environment. And that went back to high school and participating in like beach cleanup days, and just understanding what we would now call like circular economy and like just like how things, you make things and it ends up in the garbage. I don't know. It was just like, I know we learned about that. Maybe it was my very progressive elementary school education that just had me thinking about these things, I think before others were. And so I also had this interest in tech, had no engineering background. I'm fairly certain Skidmore didn't and still doesn't have any, engineering focus. But I think my mind kind of works that way, and so I was interested in tech, not to mention that it was, I was there from 1999 to 2001. So it was like kind of a big boom of tech, then a bust at the same time. And so I remember going into like recruiting sessions where companies would come to, business school. I went to UCLA, Anderson, and really just trying to absorb everything. Funny story here. My friend says to me, "Hey, there's this company that's recruiting on campus. We should go. There's an information session." And I was like, all right, what else was I going to do? I was either going to study or go, look for an internship or something. So this is 1999. I go, my friend drives me into this lecture hall, and there's like, 8 of us in this lecture hall. And there's this woman sitting in the front of the classroom, in the front of the lecture hall. And she starts talking about how, she works for this search engine and how, they're growing and they have like 50 people. And I look over at my friend and I was like, wait, why do we need another search engine? was like Alta Vista and Yahoo and like
Lycos.
and Lycos.
Yeah.
And I walked in and it was like, oh, this is ridiculous. I'm not interested in it. Of course, it turned out to be Google. But anyway, this minor tangent there. But I did really have an interest in tech, and then I had this environmental interest. And so, through the course of this 2-year period, I really came to an interest in bringing those two areas together in my career. And it was a fairly novel idea. Not very many people were thinking about it. In fact, there was, of my graduating class, there were like 7 of us that all had somewhat similar interests. And we created a new group that we called the STIG, which stood for Sustainable Technology Interest Group. And we didn't have the wherewithal to build it as its own club within the business school, but we ended up getting stuck as like kind of a sub group within the High Tech Business Association. And so the 7 of us, became very close and ultimately all went into different fields. One person went into solar, one started a clean tech hedge fund, and we've all, followed each other in our careers and helped each other along the way. But those are sort of some of the formative things that I had done, during business school. And anyway, so that I end up getting connected to the CEO of AeroVironment while I was at Anderson. He was somehow connected to the school. I don't remember, as a business leader. And so I got paired up with him, and the next thing I know, I have an internship, and AeroVironment was clear. They were a clean tech company, which there were not very many, and it had been around for a long time doing engineering services. And the CEO had a vision to build it into and evolve it into a product business, and that was something that I was really interested in. And so he ultimately hired me a full-time job right out of business school and started doing corporate development, business development, trying to take a lot of the technologies that they had worked on over the years and build them into businesses. And it was a great job. It was a lot of fun. I learned a ton. I got a huge course in clean tech, what we would now call, climate tech or energy transition. And that really formed the basis for this like next trajectory in the next chapter of my life. And not to mention, it was not only a great experience, AeroVironment became quite a successful company. So I was there for 7 years, from 2001 to 2008 around, I believe. And the company went public in 2007 timeframe. And so, it was not only a great learning experience, but it became a bit of a financial success for me. And I think when I say financial success, obviously there was like money involved, but it was also like confidence, right? I sort of like was like, okay, now I can pair up something that I know that I can pair up something that I'm passionate about. I know I can be successful at it. And I have now learned from others that, that had been successful, from the CEO and from the other parts of the management team. And anyway, so that was a very formative and important sort of step in my experiences. And frankly, just one other thought on AeroVironment, it was not the typical trajectory for an MBA student in 2001, right? I mean, the industry was not, it was not like the highest paying job. I mean, everyone was going after like, how do I get the highest paying job? How do I go into investment banking? How do I go into, consumer product goods? How do I get into management consulting? What all those things? And I think that that's always been a little bit of my personality, is to sort of be a little bit off the kind of typical path. And I just continued that on. It's a little bit of the passion or craziness of when someone tells me I can't do something, I want to do it and show them wrong.
Were you managing people there? Did you have a team?
Yeah, over time. Yeah. I mean, when I first started, I was a kind of lone soldier, and then over time, I had a few different roles. Frankly, I don't even remember all the details, but yeah, I had a team over time. Yeah.
Yeah, what'd you learn there? I mean, is it relatively young, professional, like now all of a sudden you're responsible for people, and then you went off to start your own business, which, grew to a large team. Like, was there anything in there that from a leadership perspective you were picking up?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, look, I think I learned a lot from even just how people managed me along the years, right? And one of the things that I realized, and this is, I think, very standard leadership stuff, but like it wasn't obvious. Yeah, I couldn't stand when someone was micromanaging me, right? It was like, leave, right? Like, just give me an objective. And as long as you're a driven individual, and I think from my experience, most people are driven, right? I mean, if they're in a position that interests them, and hopefully they are, and you hire that way, you can find, like, it really comes down to, this idea that people are lazy, or they're, if you're not like riding them, they're going to go sit, on their couch and watch TV and eat, Cheez-Its. Like, I don't think that's true. I think there is a small percentage of people that are like that. And so I think what I learned was, give me, objectives, and let me go off and do them and be successful. And if I'm not, then, give me some guidance or whatever. But like, that was, I think, probably the biggest thing that I learned, partly at my first job, but also at AeroVironment. And I took that, to ultimately my CEO role at EV Connect, where I just needed to find like the best people I could and point them in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, let's fast forward to EV Connect. 'Cause I remember it was, I'm looking here, it was 2009 you founded it. I don't know when I first heard of it, at some point, right? And I'm like, EV infrastructure? What the hell is that? Like, what is he doing? Like, is he really, is he nuts? And clearly you weren't nuts. Clearly you saw something. And before we get into it, like, what did you see? Like, what made you think that was going to be a thing way back, 15 years ago, 14 years ago?
Yeah. Well, one comment, and I kind of alluded to it a minute ago, is like, there's something in me, and I don't think this is common, but there's something in me where if somebody questions what I'm doing or doubts what I'm doing, it's like our motive. Like if it's obvious, then it's sort of like, oh yeah, like it has to be like not obvious. And then I don't, and then the more people that tell me that I, like, either nicely or not nicely, that it's stupid or doesn't make sense or whatever, like that just like further like fuels me for some reason. And I to this day, I don't fully understand it, but I've definitely noticed that in myself. So going back to, the infrastructure. So when I was at AeroVironment had a pretty interesting history. It was actually it had been doing engineering services in all sorts of different areas of clean tech. And one of the things that it had done in the 90s before I would join was it got a contract from General Motors to build the EV1, which, if you're at all an EV enthusiast, you would know was really the first production electric vehicle. And so AeroVironment had this really deep bench of engineers who knew a lot about EVs, but more importantly about like how to charge them and how to manage the battery and how to, like, all sorts of stuff. And so I was involved in the launch of a fast charging product that AeroVironment created that was focused on off-road electric vehicles, because in the early 2000s, there were no on-road vehicles, but there were about half of the off-road vehicles were electric. So things like forklifts and baggage tuggers in airports, if you're in an airplane and you see all the little vehicles running around, a lot of those are electrified now. And so I got kind of a taste for the industry at that time, and I recognized, fast forwarding to 2009 and even Connect founding, that transportation electrification was very viable. It just needed some time, and it needed some technology innovation, and it needed, people to have a little bit of patience around it. If it could happen in the off-road world, it could happen in the on-road world. And obviously, like lithium-ion batteries were a big innovation other things. And so when in 2009 I was sitting in a job I had for a couple of years right after AeroVironment in water technology called Nano H2O, and all of a sudden I started hearing about like Tesla Roadster, and Nissan announced the Leaf, and GM had now said they were back in EVs with the Volt, and I was like, okay, well, gosh, if these guys are getting serious about this, then they must be seeing what I can imagine happening, right? Which is that you can actually electrify a passenger vehicle, an on-road passenger vehicle. And so then I was like, well, okay, here's an opportunity, right? I have all these years of experience now. I'm one of the only people that kind of knows anything about IT. I was one of the only people that kind of like knew how to spell clean tech. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I had never like pulled the trigger, right? And I was like, well, and I also noticed that like what I believed and still believe the biggest hurdle to electrification of transportation is EV charging infrastructure. And I was like, okay, I know a little bit about this. Like, this is my moment. Like, I gotta, like, if I'm ever gonna do this, I'm gonna do it now. And so I started to think through what that meant. And I kind of, it was, strangely enough, it was more of like a process of elimination than it was like, this is what I'm gonna go do. And it was like, okay, well, I want to address transportation electrification. Starting an EV manufacturer, like that would be the most obvious. I'm just going to go build a car, right? Like to this day, I've never invested in Tesla. It's probably like one of the stupidest financial decisions. I followed the company from the beginning, and I just never believed that a startup automaker could survive against the big boys, right? And so, and that goes back to the EV Connect founding where I was like, I'm not going to go down that. So how can I enter this market? And I knew enough from AeroVironment and my experience there that the actual physical charging infrastructure wasn't terribly complicated. So putting my, MBA hat on and being like the business guy that I was, it was like, well, there's not enough differentiation and the various entry are hard and blah, blah, blah. And so to kind of get down to it, I was like, well, the software is going to be where the value is, right? And the user experience and helping people to get comfortable with this idea of driving an EV and the nuances around everything from fueling to finding charging to paying for it and all of that aspects, and not to mention the needs of the grid, the needs of your home and buildings and what that means for the load and management of all of that. Seemed really conducive to software. Add on to the fact that it was 2009, and if you were in the know in like tech, which I was like on the peripheral of, there was this thing called the cloud, right? And the cloud was kind of emerging at the time, and I was like, this is great. We can put all this stuff on the cloud. We'll go build software, and we're going to go manage all this charging infrastructure, and we're going to build a great experience. So when people buy these Volts and they buy these, Nissan Leafs, they're going to have a great experience. They're going to tell their friends, and they're going to buy more. And that was kind of the end.
And
and that was the beginning. That was the beginning.
Yeah, so that was the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, how do you take that next step? I mean, what you're talking about isn't an inexpensive thing to do, right? Like, it's going to require a lot of capital. You've got some background in that industry, right? You've got your MBA, but yet you haven't done EV charging. Like, you don't have, you don't have that as saying, hey, this is where I've like hung my hat for the last 15 years. So like, what did you do? How did you get that momentum?
Yeah, I thought Pete, you were going to go down the path of the psychology of like, how do you like leave a job with salary? And I had a
I was going to ask that.
I had a baby. I had a baby at the time.
How scary was that, man?
Yeah, I had a new house with a mortgage payment. Like that's where I thought you were going, but I'll address yours too. But I mean,
no. I think Brendan wants to hear the latter.
Listen, the son of an entrepreneur, I know what you're talking about. like going back to where you started, there's a little fear there.
Oh, there's more than a little bit. Yeah, more than.
Yeah, talk about that. Like, why was that the time? You said through some experiences you got confidence, and maybe it just all came together. But can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it was. I had, fortunately had a little bit of financial stability, nothing crazy, but like I had a little bit of like money in my pocket from AeroVironment's IPO. I was not, I wasn't the kind of guy that was going to go out and go blow it on a fancy car or whatever. And so I felt like I had like a little bit of runway that I could go try to make this happen. I had a supportive wife, fortunately, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to give it a try. And what happened fortuitously, which kind of gets back to Pete's question, was, so it's late 2009, and I have this vision of where I want to take a company and a product and where I felt the market was going. And I read about how the state of California, through the California Energy Commission, has what they call a PON, which stands for a Program Opportunity Notice, which is the fancy word for basically a grant program, where they are going to seed charging infrastructure for vehicles and try to solve the chicken and egg problem, which is a common held understanding. And it, to many extent, still exists today, which is, how do you have EVs if you can't charge them, but how do you charge EVs if you don't have vehicles, right? Or how do you invest in the infrastructure? And so what California did, and I don't remember the numbers, but they allocated, I think it was like $100 million, I could be off, to solving this by putting out this grant program or grant solicitation, looking for people who were going to try to provide solutions. And so in the course of about 3 months, I formed EV Connect for the purpose of responding to these grant programs and put in 2 grants for grant proposals to the California Energy Commission. And in early 2010, we won both of them. And like that kicked off, EV Connect. And I leaned a lot on my experiences at AeroVironment. I leaned a lot on but it was me. I mean, I basically was sitting in my initial entrepreneurial endeavor was to sit in front of my computer and write these 2 grant proposals. I needed partners, so I was meeting with people. I called on relationships that I had. Frankly, even my wife was instrumental. She had been, a fresh graduate from her master's in public health and was not new to like grant writing and like sort of how to do that. And so, I'd write the solicitation responses, and then I'd show it to her, and she'd be like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, right? So like you gotta talk to somebody who isn't gonna understand, who can understand what you're saying. And so anyway, long story short that was really the beginning of EV Connect. We won these 2 programs. We ended up with customers from the beginning. We ended up with a little bit of seed money in our pocket, and that got us off to the races.
Did you have a partner, or was this kind of like, how did that work? How did you build the initial team?
Yeah, look, it turned out to be great. I think I would be more thoughtful about it next time. And if there's any lesson that I learned, like one lesson, if you had to, there's millions of lessons, but like there was like one lesson I learned over the last, 13 years. It's really the people are just so important. And, I think I got very lucky with the partners that I had in the beginning. There was the way it worked was there was this one person who I had gotten to know, who was one of the few people in clean tech that had also graduated from Anderson. He was a couple of years older than me, so he wasn't in my graduating class, but he and I stayed connected, and I told him about my idea. And he was like, this other guy that kind of knows a little bit about this. And so he kind of put us together, and then that guy knew another guy. And so all of a sudden there was 4 of us, right? And these were people that I didn't know. I don't think I would ever do that again, even though it ended up working out, like just getting kind of mashed together with a bunch of people, one out of the four people, one out of the three other people I knew, and two I didn't. You know, the one guy who I didn't know is still like, I talk to him almost every day. He became a friend and a co-founder of mine. One of the guys that I didn't know ended up bowing out fairly early, in the business. And the guy who put us all together, interestingly enough, he put the first $50,000 of seed money into the company, but wasn't ready from a risk perspective. He had two kids and they were a little bit older. And he just, whatever risk profile wise, he wasn't going to jump into it, but he became, a co-founder. And fast forward, 8 or 9 years later, he became an executive at EV Connect, and he's still there to this day. So it's just interesting how things happen along the way and how people are, informed. But we got thrown together and that built a team. Again, I think I have to reinforce this. Like, if I was going to do it again, I'd be way more methodical and way more thoughtful about it. But in some respects, like the other part of I've learned, I think, from a leadership standpoint with building teams is you really want diversity in thought. And I think one of the mistakes that I've seen so many people make, just in generally hiring, but also just in team building, is that the natural gravitation of people is to hire people like themselves or to hire people that they can relate to. And that's really not what we want. If a bunch of people that you all like, you know really well, and you kind of like, you all have similar backgrounds or you kind of think similarly, like, I think you're not going to get anywhere. And I think there was something special about having these like four random people that really didn't have anything in common other than we all kind of had this like similar passion for transportation electrification or a belief that it could happen. And that was enough to kind of keep us together for the most part in the beginning and spark, the beginning of the company.
What was the journey like? Like, was it a rocket ship? Did you guys take right off? Was it a slow climb?
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely wasn't a rocket ship. And I don't even know if I would call it a slow climb. It was rocky, right? I mean, there were definitely periods of, running out of money. There were periods of, I'd say the worst experience that I had professionally, and probably one of the worst experiences in my life, but probably the most difficult experience professionally was I brought on a new partner. So one step back, I would say, is that for new entrepreneurs out there or aspiring entrepreneurs, when you're building a company, to me, there's like the founders, but like there's founders that kind of come about throughout the different stages of the company, right? And I think that's it's a little unfair. I don't know how you fix it, but it's a little unfair when like it's just the guys who start the company to get to call themselves the founders, because in many respects, you get really important people that enter the company at their varying stages who are instrumentally important in taking the company to the next level, and they almost become founders of that stage. I typically call them they've been partners of mine. Anyway, I ended up making a terrible mistake and brought on a COO that became a partner of mine within a few years of the company. And he was just like, I don't know if sheer evil is the right word, but like, it just really turned out to be a bad decision. He was just it was all about him, and counter to the culture that I was trying to build. And ultimately he ended up, in many respects, sabotaging the business and going off and working and leading what became our main competitor, for a number of years. And, I'm still scarred by it, I think, but it was a great lesson in just, learning about and making sure you're doing your diligence on people before you kind of bring them in and getting comfortable with them. And so I think so much of my career has been luck, right? I mean, I think so much of life is luck, right? I believe that. And fortunately, I think I've ended up on the right side of luck more often than not. But in this particular case, it was not a good situation.
I realize we've been talking about your company, but yet we hadn't really just defined what you do. I mean, EV infrastructure is kind of a broad category for a lot of people. Like, is it plugging in at your house? Is it plugging in while you're at the grocery store? Like, exactly what was the product that you all delivered?
Yeah. So I mean, EV Connects, ultimately was about providing charging to, but there's a few different facets to EV charging. There's the physical charging station, which is the most obvious and visible part of the process. If anyone's driven an EV or plugged in their car, then they know that sort of what you connotate with EV charging. The reality, though, is like most EV charging stations are really just kind of like fancy extension cords, right? For like, they're like outlets with like bigger electronics in them and a cord that goes into your car. And so, and the reality, and I kind of knew that was like one of the benefits of having some experience with it. And so for me, and the strategy and what we built with EV Connect, it was really more about how do we build a user experience that was great for the driver so that when they bought that first car or they rented that first car or they borrowed that first car that was an EV, they had a great experience, and the charging, they could go back to their friend at dinner and go, oh yeah, I used this car, this EV, and it was great, and I just plugged it in and it worked and I paid for it and it was done, right? And so that was really like what we were trying to do. And we did that with software. So our solution, in short, was we are kind of, EV Connect was the property manager or the asset manager for the charging infrastructure. And so we would go to landlords, basically, or anyone that could own charging infrastructure. But it was pretty much just people that owned property. It could have been a workplace or an office. It could have been a hotel. It could have been a government, like a municipal government that had a parking lot or fleet. And we would say, hey, we're going to take over the operation of your charging, and we're going to do that in a great way so that you don't have to deal with it, and the user experience for all those drivers are easy, right? We didn't want, and it was a fairly easy sell if you were interested in charging, because people like landlords don't want to deal with that, right? They want to collect rents, right? They don't want to like manage this like thing in the parking lot. And so that was really the idea behind the business. And we did that, behind the, or under the hood was the software and the solution and all the services and the mobile apps, all the actual product that we put together was the ability to deliver to the landlord.
Yeah. Where do you see, I mean, this is a selfish question, right? I've got electric cars and all the things, and like, what do you see happening, with the charging infrastructure? Because right now, I mean, I don't have a Tesla, so I don't get to, I understand the Tesla network is pretty rock solid, but like if I go to Electrify America, it's like a roll of the dice if it's going to work, and where do you see it all going?
Yeah, it's the big problem with the industry, and frankly, it's always been what EV was trying to solve. And I think one of the reasons why we ended up, continuing to be successful and elevating ourselves above the fray, because so much of the industry was focused on just selling charging stations and getting them installed and like moving on, right? And because we were providing an ongoing management service, we couldn't do that because we were responsible for the ultimate user. And so I think that really elevated us as an industry leader. Where is it going? The industry is going to have to get its act together, frankly, right? And I mean, fortunately, Tesla has been there to set the standard around what can be possible. in the industry's defense, I think there were some big mistakes that were made around the build out that Tesla figured out fairly quickly. And that one of those mistakes was that, going back to the comment around chicken and an egg, right? Even back when we first won our grant in 2010, the California Energy Commission and all the funders and the players, all the part of the ecosystem, they just wanted to get like dots on the map, right? Because they wanted it to feel like, from an EV driver perspective or a prospective EV driver, that there was charging everywhere. And so what they did was they built charging locations that only had like one or two chargers in them. So it was more about like quantity over quality, I guess, right? Get as many of these out there, get people comfortable that they could fuel like a gas station, and everything will be okay, right? And what Tesla realized at some point early was that if you have one or two chargers at a location, if that one or two break, you're kind of screwed as a driver, because now all of a sudden you've taken the effort to get to that location to go charge, and you have like, now you have no option, right? You're kind of like out of luck. And Tesla decided to start building these fairly large locations, meaning like they had dozens of charging stations. In fact, I was at a Tesla supercharger location a few weeks ago. I think they have like over 100 chargers there now, right? I don't think that's a standard location for Tesla, but like they usually have at least a couple of dozen chargers. And the dirty little secret is that if you look around, which I do, not too many other people do, but at least one or two of those couple of dozen are broken, right? And the same goes if you look at a gas station. Like if you go to a gas station with 20 pumps on them, a couple of them are broken. But when you have 18 other ones out of the 20 that are working, it doesn't really mean anything to the driver, right? You can just go to the next one, and it's like everyone keeps moving. And I think that's just one example of like some of the pain that the industry has felt over the last few years, and that those lessons are being corrected, right? There's locations are being built that are much larger. Part of that is because now there's more cars, and the money can support the investment that's being made into these locations can be supported. Not to mention that it was an early industry, and so now there's much more reliability equipment, the software and the services that are being delivered like from companies like Connect are really rock solid now. And so I think there's like just this natural maturation that's happening. And then interestingly enough, just one other thought on your comment about Tesla. The other automakers, not Volkswagen, most of the other automakers have announced a consortium where they're going to build a competitive network to Tesla, and so they've got Tesla in their sights in order to build a really robust network. And I think they'll get there, right? I mean, that's what Electrify America, for the audience that doesn't know, is owned by Volkswagen, right? So it's I assume, Pete, if you talked about Electrify America, is your car a Volkswagen?
No, it's Hyundai and Polestar, but they both have
partner.
that.
Yeah, maybe they partner. Anyway,
yeah.
Point is that I think that we're going to see more competition, I guess, is the summary of my point, and more competition, in markets we know create better products.
Yeah, well, that's good. Hey, so now fast forward to the end of the journey. You were acquired by Schneider, and what was that like? I mean, how did that feel after all those years of the journey?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's sort of like what every entrepreneur imagines, right? There's sort of like, I think most entrepreneurs have this vision of ultimately selling their company and sailing off into the sunset. I had that was great. It was short lived for me. It was like maybe like a week where I was like, all right, yeah. not to say I have any regrets. It was just, it's kind of, you put a goal in front of yourself, and then after the goal, you're like, okay, well, what's next, right? Especially if you're an entrepreneur, you're rolling like that. And so for me, it's been great. I mean, I'm now, we closed with, and then Schneider bought us about a year and a half ago. And so, I worked for them and helped to transition the company into the greater Schneider organization over a year. And then for the last few months, I've been, trying to take some time off, spending time with my family. And fortunately, I had a job over the last decade or decade and a half where I had a lot of flexibility. So it wasn't like I wasn't around with my family. I think the biggest thing for me was like just trying to be mentally present, right? And so now I'm physically here, but like I have been, but I'm really trying to be more mentally there for them. And so that's been great. And I've really been enjoying that, everything from, taking the kids to school and picking them up if I can, as much as I can, and doing the various family stuff. But still not 100% sure what's next.
Yeah. Well, in that spirit, like we always like to close these interviews with this question around the path you took. Like if somebody said to you, hey, you could hit reset and take, you do one of two things. You can either travel the same path that you just did over the last decade and a half, 2 decades, or you could take a whole new path and see where it takes you. Like what would you do?
Oh, yeah, unequivocally, I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, there's so many ups and downs, but I mean, I think if life was like a flat line, that really wouldn't be a particularly good life, and I feel like I've sort of achieved what I've wanted to achieve, and now it's very much about giving back and trying to. I still am very passionate about the environment, especially climate, and now my task and objective over the coming months and years is to figure out how to take all the experiences and knowledge and stuff that I've acquired over the last 20 years and really help other climate entrepreneurs, be successful so that we can make a dent into the challenges that confront us.
So final question, Jordan, where can people learn more about you? Where do you want to send them so they can find out what's next?
Probably LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. It's become kind of a standard great place to stay connected with folks. I've gone through fits and spurts. I was very active when I was a CEO of BB Connect. I went through a little bit of dormancy over the summer months, but I do plan to use that as a communication tool going forward, and do try to communicate through there. So I would say Jordan Raymer.
Great, Jordan Raymer. Thank you for taking the time. What a journey, and so cool to see where you came from. All back in those college days to today. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brendan. It's fun. Appreciate you giving me the chance to tell the story.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Leadership Backstory. Make sure to subscribe from your favorite podcast player and leave us a review if you like what you hear. We appreciate you sharing your feedback with other listeners. Peter Barron and Brendan Schneider host The Leadership Backstory. Catch you on the next episode.